Falcha, welcome back. This is part 2 of our book, today's Irish Granny Tarot. Part 2 of our book, I've been here before. When Souls of the Holocaust Return. We were just starting chapter 6, Mysterious Fears and Phobias. For example, the fear of falling. This one young woman had this horrible fear of falling, and it wasn't fear of heights, and it wasn't fear of falling off of things. It was standing on flat ground and having a fear of falling. Then she saw a picture of the Einsatzgruppen who lined people up at ditches and shot them dead, and that was what she was remembering, because she had this fear of falling from flat ground into a pit. There was a rabbi who did not believe in reincarnation. Not all Jews believe in reincarnation. And he had a horrible, overwhelming fear of showers. And when he was regressed under hypnosis, he started to describe this fear of showers, and it sounded very much like a gas chamber. And working through this, it ended his phobia. So there's a practical purpose to this sort of research. There are those like Ian Stevenson, like Brian Weiss, like Sara Rigler, who believe that the right kind of regressive hypnotherapy can address the symptoms in this life that interfere with from past lives. This fear of showers is very common phobia in the survey. Also, another really common phobia, and this is just terrible, is fear of losing your children. And there are a lot of stories in this about that kind of thing. And I would recommend one of my favorite movies, because I'm a masochist, Sophie's Choice. That's all I'll say. It's a great movie, fabulous movie. Many of the survey respondents had a deep knowledge of the Holocaust, but they'd never heard of it. They were never taught about it. They were raised in Christian families. Lots of them were like in the Midwest, and their families were the farthest thing in the world from Jewish scholars or historians, and it wasn't taught in school. There's a woman who was afraid that when her kids went to school, she just was terrified to let them go to school. She was terrified to leave them with the babysitter. She was overprotective and anxious and afraid of separation. This was starting to cripple her daily life and the children. She underwent hypnotic regression and discovered, in the process of this regression, that she had been a mother in the Lodz ghetto and had been forced to hand her children over. And they actually researched this, and they discovered there was a roundup where they made the parents hand over their children. I mean, I just can't even. And when that happened, she gave up. She gave up fighting for life. And then next, the adults were rounded up. She was taken to a concentration camp. She said she just lay down on the ground and gave up and died. So this life is a chance to change that. A lot of these people will have overwhelming fear of airports, train stations, trains, Germans, German language, black boots, because many of them were children. And, you know, if you're looking at adults that are in a German uniform, you'd be eye level with their boots. Uniforms. They had claustrophobia from hiding. Many of them who probably had been adults and had to deal with the arcane working of the Nazi bureaucracy have a real horrible fear of bureaucracy. They have a fear of camps, camping, camps, large groups like that, marching. They have a fear of a lack of food. Some people just stockpile food. It's a long story, but we once were involved in a family that had a Romanian orphan. If you remember the horrible orphanages in Romania. And when she came here, she was about 13, and she would hide food in the bed. People who've been starved. It's protection, self-protection. Some people are afraid of striped pajamas. That's apparent. And all of these people have these Holocaust dreams. Or they get a sense of deja vu, or they go someplace like Warsaw and they feel like they know the place. They can without a map, take people around. So lots of commonalities here. Chapter 7, Lifting the Veil, Past Life Regressions. So there's different kinds of regressions, and now this is connected to Jewish religion, so this would not necessarily be something a secular person would be involved in, but she became devout, and so she talks quite a bit about it. The first kind is when a Kabbalist psychic energy healer or a clairvoyant, I can't read my writing. So in the Jewish religion, a Kabbalist psychic energy healer, which is a thing, or a clairvoyant, a Kabbalistic clairvoyant, will read you and tell you your past life. And this is how you regress, you're told. Then there's, hypnosis, deep relaxation, meditation with a trained therapist. And then there's self-induced, where you do a meditation or self-hypnosis and you start to remember things. But also the fourth thing is it can be triggered. Memories can be triggered by events or things around you. Brian Weiss actually trains people to do past life regression techniques in workshops. So if you're interested in it, I think you can find it online. Oh, he makes CDs, so I'm sure it's online. It's a woman named Katie Anderson. She's Catholic. She was born in Florida. Sorry, Katie. In 1981. Had never had Holocaust dreams, and did the art of the Holocaust from her mind. So, what's up with that? Phobias that are also common are losing a home, or losing your family, or there are a number of people who went through these experiences, and when they were talking to the psychologist, hypnotherapist, practitioner, it was discovered that they would have sought out weird tattoos, like a Z done in white ink, in a place where, you just right here. Of course, now tattoos are just ubiquitous, but this was unusual at the time. And they did a little research, and they discovered that they did this past life regression, and they discovered that this woman, going back, had been an emaciated, dirty man, unkempt and hiding, and his family had been gone, and he was describing under hypnosis what his experience was, and he referred to himself as a Zigeuner. I probably said that wrong. A Zigeuner, and this is what was called a gypsy, a Romany. And there was a period of time in 1943 in some of the camps where the Germans, the Nazis, tattooed a Z on the inside of their arm. And here she had gone, a Catholic, born in Florida in 1981, had no connection to anything about the Holocaust, and ends up with a Z tattooed on her forearm. Past life regression offers a rapid treatment of psychological symptoms. It can be very effective. Dr. Weiss says that it's a consciousness, it's your consciousness itself that cures you, and relieves the trauma. You're re-experiencing a part of a past life, and that can let the soul go through those experiences and adequately process what happened, adequately process the death, which may have been quick, unexpected, traumatic, resisted, and this gives you an opportunity as a redo. And but they were warned all the way through here, you really requires a skilled past life regression therapist. Don't be getting your great aunt or somebody to do it for you. You need assistance to work through the trauma. This can be very traumatizing. Dr. Weiss has connected physical symptoms today that people experience in hundreds of cases with violent past life experiences or death once they've been regressed. Story of a Greek woman who was regressed and remembered her last life as a young man in Romania. She remembered that she could speak Hebrew and could write it. She'd had a wedding. She remembered the wedding song and the writing in Hebrew on the inside of the ring that she got at this wedding. And at the end of her life, as this old man in the past, at the end of his life, because he survived, asked the therapist to contact 3 of his surviving nephews. So here's the situation. You've got a woman from Greece who has all these terrible symptoms. And her story is she was reincarnated from this young man, Jewish, Hebrew, spoke, wrote, sang songs, knew the culture, survived, lived to be old, and died without ever reconnecting. He had thought that he had 3 surviving nephews, and he died before he had a chance to reconnect. She's born. She has all these symptoms. She goes to Dr. Weiss. He regresses her, and this question comes out. Please find my 3 surviving nephews. So the old man also said that the reason for this therapy, why people are drawn into it, is the whole world needs to know that this should no longer be a secret. And she would get all better if she could reconnect with these nephews and put his soul at ease, because it was unfinished business. Dr. Stevenson observed that many kids speak of past lives, but they're stopped because they're discouraged by the adults around them. And therefore, a lot of good stories are from countries like India and Sri Lanka, where it's actually encouraged to talk about it. And we know that from our earlier reading. Chapter 8, Emergency Landings, Jewish Souls in Christian Bodies. Jewish Kabbalists believe there are different kinds of souls, and one particular kind is entirely Jewish. And a Jewish soul can be reborn into a non-Jewish person to effect rectification, tikkun, or to learn a lesson. So many millions of Jewish souls died all at once in the Holocaust that there weren't enough Jewish mothers to provide them all with bodies. And these souls often feel an inexplicable discomfort. Many convert just out of the blue. They've been raised Lutheran or Catholic, and they suddenly become all in on Judaism. Jews do not proselytize. Interesting thing, I didn't know this. The religion discourages conversion. And a rabbi, by law, Jewish law, must turn a prospective convert away 3 times. You go to the rabbi, you say, I want to be a Jew, and they pat you on the head and say, well, that's very nice, go be a good person. And they let you do that 3 times, and I guess that indicates that you're serious. And then if you persist, they have to give you a year, at least, usually longer, of intensive study. Many survey respondents said that they'd felt that they were Jewish, they identified as Jewish from a very young age. And when they converted, it was to become who they are. They all have a similar pattern of feeling they didn't fit into a Christian family, that they felt Jewish and they had Holocaust dreams. But only about half the people who go through this trauma, this remembrance of the Holocaust, only about a half of them actually do convert. And one of the things they all have in common is a strong negative reaction to anti-Semitism, as do we all. So the reason that Jewish souls go to Christian bodies is that there aren't enough Jewish bodies. Now, and this is in the context of the Jewish belief system. They believe that there are different types of souls, and I don't believe that it's about one being better than the other. I think it's about one just being different than the other. Then in the past life, they wished so strongly to not be Jews because they were trapped. They were in a concentration camp. Oh God, if I hadn't been born Jewish, I wouldn't be going through this. That wish was answered, and they were born into a Christian body. Or they might have been born into a Christian body because they were so shamed by something they had done during the Holocaust, One young man worked in the Sonderkommando, which was the group of prisoners who were forced to strip down the arriving prisoners, go through their personal possessions, help to unload the gas chambers, and put the bodies in the ovens. And this one person got regressed and had this terrible sense of shame that he had cooperated with the Nazis. They were well fed. They were killed. They eventually were killed by the next group. They renewed the groups constantly, and they were fully aware of it. They were buying a little time, hoping maybe some miracle would happen and they'd get out of it. But they felt unworthy to be a Jew in the new life. They felt damned by their past behavior. Chapter 9, Victories Vanquishing the Demons of the Past. The purpose of the soul's descent to the physical world in Kabbalah is called the Tikkun. We've talked about that. It's the rectification of past mistakes. And I kind of talk about this a lot. I talk about it. I wouldn't say I practice it, but in theory, let's just say, as an intellectual exercise, anything you do that's not from compassion or love or that hurts somebody, you'll have to undo. Basically. I mean, that's really simplistic, but basically. None of this has to be complicated. It's pretty straightforward. So you might think twice before you blurt out what you really think, which is my problem. So Tikkun is the rectification of past mistakes. There may have been a specific action that you need to atone for. It may be a character flaw. For example, let's say you were a person in a position of authority and you were a pathological liar. Let's just pretend. This is something that needs to be addressed, and there will be a reckoning. There might be a disposition of anger at God or at other humans, like you're mad that God allowed them to take your children. You're mad that God let you be born a Jew and end up in a camp. So you have to find healing of faith and love. Now, I would say, I'm gonna interject my own personal belief here. The word faith is wrought with all sorts of religious institutional implications. And I would say what you really need to find the healing is of love. And there are many paths to that. This is not saying that if you don't have a religious faith that you haven't successfully done the work. No. This is something being stated by a person of a strong religious faith. And I disagree with that, but that's my personal interjection into the book. It's about love. All of this is very likely understood very early in life, early in childhood. And this discernment may be inborn, but it equally can come later in life, triggered by an event or eventually dawning on you. The spontaneous return of unconscious memories happens when a person is ready, whether the person likes it or not. The realization of reincarnation replaces the fear of mortality with the assurance of immortality, the eternal longevity of one's core identity, the soul. The terminology may change, but the concept remains similar. She says it's like getting off a roller coaster and getting in line right away for whatever purpose. Sara, not this Sara, was born Jewish, but no Holocaust connections. And at 18, she became an Israeli citizen. But she developed suddenly, as an adult, a fear of flying. On a flight, she had a panic attack. And this is really interesting. And I'm really condensing the story. It's a long story. So she has this panic attack. And the flight attendant comes and invites her. There's a couple up in first class who invite you to join them. Now, I couldn't figure out why they had an extra seat to offer her, but maybe they offered to pay. It didn't go into that. So she goes up to sit with this couple, only to discover that they're wealthy Germans. And they had pleasant conversation. They were discussing books. The book she was reading was a Jewish travel book pre-World War II, the descriptions of a young man traveling around before the war. And this was how this German woman, who very generously provided her with a more comfortable flight, this is how she responded. Her response stunned me. She said, "The Jewish people are unbelievable how once again they're rising in power to destroy the world and all its progress, just as they had nearly done to Germany." Now this is this woman's opinion, not my opinion. With that blatant expression of German anti-Semitism, Sara blacked out for a few moments, so she couldn't believe it. When she regained consciousness, she felt like she died and come back. She was aware that this was no chance encounter. God had arranged this meeting, this face-to-face encounter with a high-ranking, Jew-hating German, in order to give her an opportunity to do what she had failed to do in her previous lifetime. She faced a choice. She could shrink away and obsequiously return to her seat in economy, or she could stand up and defend her people. She suddenly became aware that she was not a Jew overpowered by the Third Reich, about to die. She was alive and had, through the shadowy mists of time, survived as a Jew in a new place and a new period. She was not a prisoner of her past. She broke through the bars of her fear and was free. With this realization came another that switched their roles. She had thought that this wealthy German woman was the benefactor, and she was the almost submissive recipient of her largesse. But once liberated from her fear, Sara sensed a new mission. And this is what she says. "Although it might appear that this woman was here to help me, I suddenly felt that truly I was here to help her. She had a soul buried in such darkness. She had been living in complete darkness and evil lies her entire life. Comfortable, luxurious darkness, to be sure, but just as her noble family's evil lies and history in Germany went back generations. Yet she was actually somewhat engaged in dialogue with me on that flight in first class, thanks to her generosity towards me in my neediness at that time. Her soul had reached out towards mine. I had to reach into her worldview and open her eyes to my truth. I told her she was mistaken. I told her that I was Jewish and Israeli. I told her about all the gifts she enjoys daily that are thanks to Israeli inventiveness. I told her about the loving kindness and sweet simplicity revealed in the book I was reading about Jews in Europe before World War II. The German woman was shocked but remained polite. She listened to Sara's assertions and argued with them. Sara stood her ground. She defended the Jewish people and Israel. Apparently, Sara won the argument because the German woman wrote down the name of the author and the book and promised to find the book in German in order to read it. Sara also won in a more significant way. After this encounter, her fear of flying completely disappeared. She testifies, "I also seem to have less fear in general now, even when faced with potentially frightening circumstances. Her only regret is that she didn't thank the German woman for participating in her cure." So many souls of the Holocaust carry anger and fear and grievance. That's why they're here, to work through that. That's one of the reasons for tikkun. And this all can be vanquished by understanding the point of this incarnation, this reality. So then we have Devorah, born 1975. She said, "I have had hundreds of panic attacks related to the Holocaust, waking up in the middle of the night, not being able to breathe, feeling like I was dying alone. Many images of the gas chambers and bodies on the floor, or feeling that my child had been taken away from me for many years. Unbearable, endless pain and grief that feels like it has been stuck in every cell of my body. I've cried what feels like millions of hours over the past 20 years. I had many years of unbelievable pain, guilt, and rage towards the Nazis and towards God and towards myself for the belief that I had to abandon a baby that died. The pain over the years was as real and strong as if the Nazis were standing in front of me." So she had had a baby and they were escaping, and the only way she could get away was to leave this baby. She struggled for years to ground her soul, and she devised a program which she called a dance journey. I have seen my own past life story over the years. I believe I was Jewish communist. I believe I died in the gas chambers hating God and the Nazis with hatred that one cannot believe one can even hold inside oneself. I wanted to kill and take revenge. I spent sometimes 8 hours a day digging in the trenches, trying to get out of that hatred and anger. This voice kept coming down. You're just hurting yourself by holding on to the rage. And then all this discomfort she had, each discomfort pushed through a new soul truth, which eventually landed me in a home in Jerusalem, where she was able to work out that anger. Junie. Let's see what this is about Junie. I just had this hatred for all things German. The very word Germany, Nazi, Hitler, or the sight of a swastika would send shivers up my spine. I could not abide the word concentration because it meant concentration camp to me. The only place I felt really spiritually safe was with Jewish people. I have been this way all of my life. I think about the Holocaust often, sometimes daily. Whereas I have Jewish friends who think like I do in this context, I have never met another Gentile who thinks and feels the way I do. I do remember feeling guilty when I was little for being alive and for living in a wonderful home with nice parents, friends, and a wonderful neighborhood. I felt so ashamed that I lived while millions had died. Just imagine being a child and feeling that. It's just unimaginable. I remember looking up at some Christian symbols and thinking, had I lived then, I would not have stayed silent. I would have done something. I know I would have done something to help. I felt deep, deep guilt and terrible shame in being alive and for having a good life. All of my life, my mantra was, if I had lived then, I would have done something to help. Then she read an article called A Question of Duty, written by Stephen Mosier. The article was about the methodical killing of unwanted baby girls due to China's one-child policy. There was an editorial comment at the end of the article that said something to the effect of reports of the widespread killing of infant baby girls is like the scattered reports coming out of Europe in 1938 about the methodical killing of Jews. My blood ran cold. My immediate thought was, this is my chance. I will not be silent. I will intervene. I will help. So I adopted my first daughter from China in 1996 and my second one in 2001. After adopting her Chinese daughters, literally saving their lives, Junie's lifelong guilt ebbed away. Of course, the choice to adopt a child may take just a moment, but the ramifications of that choice, raising a child, takes years of committed effort. A failure to act can be rectified by action. Simple math, difficult life choice. Then there's a story of a young woman in Texas who hears a song on the radio and it just sounds familiar. What the heck is that song? I've got to figure out what it is. So she pursues it and discovers it's a Jewish song. And she knew the song. How did she know the song? She was Christian. So she converted 2 years later, but she continued on her quest. She went to Israel and became an expert on terrorism. She struggled for years with PTSD, but why? She didn't know why she had it. Eventually, she was led to understand the connection between her dreams and her memories of a young man forced to work with ovens at Auschwitz. So she asked the rabbi, what's this all about? And what about the guilt? This is the one who experienced the guilt of collaboration. Am I to atone for that choice? And the rabbi told her this interesting thing. It's okay to break all the commandments to save one's life, except murder, adultery, and idolatry. There's greater complicity if you commit those things, but to atone, you have to acknowledge there's a process. First, you have to acknowledge your wrongdoing. And you have to say it out loud. I mean, you have to be able to absolutely describe what you did, your responsibility in the action, no excuses. Like, oh, I was young, or I didn't know. No. You have to absolutely describe what you did. Then you have to let go of the regret. Now, not the guilt. Guilt is self-serving. I'm sorry, don't let go of regret. Feel the regret, let go of the guilt. Guilt is self-serving. Guilt is like, oh, poor pitiful me. Regret is, I feel really badly that I did this bad thing. Then you have to promise that you won't ever do it again. And you have to state this before God. And this is part of her religious system. So this young woman went to Auschwitz to ask forgiveness in front of 10 witnesses. This is how you do it. And she happened to encounter a group of school kids, school girls, and she asked them if they would help her to perform a religious duty. And they said yes. And she had this beautiful speech about what she had done and the horrible regret she felt and how she would never do something like that again. Commitment to good acts and love. And these poor kids were looking at her like, oh my God. Okay, chapter 10, meeting again. In the Kabbalah, I think this is really interesting. Souls are connected in soul groups and you return together. There are different permutations of relationships, but you might sense a feeling of recognition on meeting someone, and this is meant to have rectifying potential, to empathize with other souls by changing their roles, to pay a debt, or to do unfinished business. So what this is saying is groups of souls between incarnations hang out together and say, okay, well, you were my mother this last life, and you were really mean to me, and I was a horrible child as a result, and I did X, Y, and Z. So this time around, I'll be the parent, and you be the child. Now, that's kind of a simplistic explanation, but it's the general idea. Or friends, parents you got along well with. In the next life, just maybe good friends. I'll tell you something. I met my husband. We couldn't be any more different. I mean, if they had tried, we could not be more different. And we met by accident at work at a big hospital. And before I ever met him, I was going out to my car with my good friend, who's still my friend, one night. And he was also going to his car, but at the other end of the parking lot. And I turned to my friend and I said, who is that guy? And she said, oh, just some stupid guy who works in the lab. And he's a very quiet, unprepossessing sort of person, and he wasn't my type, whatever that meant. And it took us a long time to actually acknowledge some sort of connection. It didn't start out, a love story. But I had always felt from the moment I saw him, I didn't think, oh, look at that guy, I'm going to marry him. No, I thought, who is that guy? Why does he feel he has such a strong sense of importance in my life? Why is that? Very weird. It was a weird experience. And I've had friends that I've met that this exact same reaction. Not a lot, a handful. Interesting. And I wonder if there's a connection. Like I have a couple of sisters who were born on the same day, exactly 10 years apart. And I wonder if there's any kind of sort of an astrological influence on that incarnation. It's interesting. So this is sense of recognition, and maybe you need to work something out that you did together that was bad for one or the other of you, or maybe you need to empathize with what they went through by going through it yourself this time around, changing roles. Maybe you owe a debt of some sort, unfinished business. You didn't quite finish what you were supposed to learn the last time. You might meet a soul that was formerly really negative to you and go through the whole thing again. Great. Science today is beginning to give credibility to this whole idea, this sense of recognition. Dr. Judith Orloff wrote a book called The Second Sight. Now, this is a legitimate scientist, respected in her field. She makes a strong case for the reliability of intuitive knowing. The synchronicities, déjà vu, premonitions, that are too often written off as imagination. She corroborates her validation of intuition by describing experiments and studies of intuitive knowing conducted at UCLA, as well as citing the latest scientific findings suggesting that intuition comes from a different part of the brain. And I told somebody about this. I read this fact a long time ago, and they were absolutely gobsmacked when I told them this. Now, it's well known. Cutting-edge science associates intuition with a separate brain in the gut, called the enteric nervous system, a neuronal network that learns and stores information. How many times does somebody say, I say it all the time, I can feel it in my gut. It's a thing in the pit of your gut. That's your gut brain, your enteric brain. It's an actual part of the nervous system. It's brain cells in your gut. In addition, Harvard researchers have linked the overall capacity for intuition with the basal ganglia, a part of the brain that informs us that something is not right and we better act on it. So this is something that can actually be described scientifically now. Intuition, foreboding, meeting somebody and thinking, oh, I don't know about that person, or who is that person? There's actually a scientific explanation, but it goes beyond that. But we're coming to remember what Dr. Bruce Solheim said, we're coming to the nexus of physics and metaphysics. So everyone can have that gut feeling, but the intuition is stronger in some people than in others, and it's mostly because you're taught to not listen to it. I can't tell you how many times I've said, oh, I feel it in my gut, and everyone will go, oh, come on. And, you start to question your own sense. Don't question it. In fact, you can develop it. You can make it stronger and more accurate if you pay attention to it. Often, past life patterns repeat until you get it right. Sometimes finding the roots of a dysfunctional relationship in a previous life evens the roles out and helps the relationship in this life. A belief in reincarnation and past life regression can expose connections that have been broken in a past life. So it can be very, very helpful. This woman named Carol, let me find the pertinent page. Carol said, I had to learn that I would be safe in this life. This is the one who was in Vienna. Love comes back. One of the most profound lessons for me is that even though I felt I lost everything so unfairly in my past life, all has been returned, including love. I had lost my husband and 2 children in that life, but I feel that through my present family, that love has returned. Also, I was born into a loving family in this life and felt protected, something that I needed to experience after all the trauma from my past life. It was a huge leap for me to decide to have children. I was afraid to take on the responsibility. When my daughter was an infant, I wouldn't let her out of my sight. My husband and my brother were encouraging me to go to a movie with my brother and let my husband watch the baby, and I held onto the door jamb crying, I don't want to go. I wouldn't leave her. So this is profound trauma. Chapter 11, From Death to Birth. So the author took a trip around the world. She was in India when she was 21 in college. She was in New Delhi and continued in this sort of mystical search. And after she graduated, this is after that panic attack in Vienna, she joined a monastic ashram in Cohasset, Massachusetts. And I know that there are people who watch these videos here on this channel who have belonged to ashrams. Fascinating to me, absolutely fascinating. And it's my fault that we had a lockdown and a quarantine, because I can't tell you how many times I joked to my husband, I could probably make a really good cloistered nun if I didn't have to do all the praying. And here we are. Sorry about that, you guys. So she was angry at God about the Holocaust. The ultimate indictment about the whole thing to her was that God allowed the death of 1.5 million children. So in this ashram, she had to pick what's called an Ishtar, a representation of God to try to emulate. maybe a parallel, not exactly the same thing, but maybe some sort of a parallel to Catholic saints. You find a saint, you pick a saint for confirmation. I picked Saint Cecilia because I wanted to be a concert pianist. I neglected to develop the talent. She's the patron saint of music. But that's the kind of thing. Somebody to emulate, somebody whose life, like maybe you'll pick St. Francis and do a life of self-sacrifice like St. Vincent. And, these are stereotyped figures. Their lives are much less two-dimensional. They're much more complicated than what's presented to us. But this Ishtar, it's a representation of God. So she picked the Hindu goddess of death, Mother Kali. And which is really odd, kind of a dark choice. Kali is black with a garland of heads around her, human heads. She has 4 arms, and she embodies death as not the ultimate defeat, but a stage in a never-ending process. She is a reminder that this is just a step in a wheel. The wheel of birth and death goes from birth to death. The death goes to a new life to pay off karmic debt. And there's only one escape, which is moksha, the spiritual enlightenment. And that's what we're all here, to learn a lesson. So her past, her dreams in fluent German, the flashbacks in Vienna, the hatred of Germans, the obsession with the Holocaust. In the ashram, she started to feel that she died in the Holocaust, but returned to a peaceful, prosperous, stable society and to good parents, sort of as not a reward, but to make up for it. And she grew to know that death is merely a transition. The ashram, they were universalists, that they believed that all religions led to the same goal. Very much what Kim Carey talks about. We may all have very different routes, but we're all ending up in the same place. She went to a lecture, and she heard that lecture. It introduced her to different types of Judaism, and a light bulb went on over her head. So she went to an Hasidic enclave in Borough Park in Brooklyn to learn Jewish mysticism. And, it's no easy feature, as we've talked about. You really have to push to want to do it. So one day she learned a prayer about God protecting her, that no evil would happen, and the retribution of the wicked would be manifested by God. And this made her rush out of the lecture in anger, because she didn't feel that had happened in the Holocaust. She felt anger about what happened to her and to the kids in the Holocaust. So the rabbi arranged for her to go to a yeshiva in Jerusalem, it's a school, and it was specifically for foreign women. She decided to stay, but she was required to meet with the head of the ashram and break her association formally with the ashram. But lo and behold, where was the head of the ashram? She had traveled, and it was a lengthy trip. She wasn't going home anytime soon. She was in Germany. So she would have to do an overnight layover in Frankfurt, and there was an unexpected delay. And because of the unexpected delay, it's very hard to break away from this ashram. You weren't allowed to just take off or whatever. But because of the delay, the leader of the ashram had time to reconsider and did give her the blessing to leave and stay in Jerusalem. And in her Torah observant group, she had to get married and have kids. So she broke with the ashram, went back to the yeshiva. It was all about the Torah, and the expectation for women is you get married and have children. But this terrified her because of her past life experience. The rabbi told her that souls come from the highest of the 10 sephirots, the channels of divine energy that are manifest in the world, from the Keter, the crown sephirot. So that's like a tree, kind of a tree of life, which is sort of analogous, I think. I hope I'm not saying this inaccurately, but it's kind of like the chakras, is that sense of building up to taking off, right? And the children come from the highest one, the crown sephirot. So eventually, the people tried to pair her up, and she never liked anybody, and she was getting older and older, and it was all a big stress. And she finally met a guy on her own, and they hit it off, and they got married and had a daughter. And she was shocked, absolutely shocked at how wonderful it felt to be a mother. She had never expected that. But then she almost died from an ectopic pregnancy. And she spent the next 5 years trying for another child. It seemed impossible. And after much medical effort, much financial effort, much praying, she did shrines and trips and just everything you could think of. They were down to their last IVF treatment with only one egg, and the tech reluctantly agreed to go ahead and implant this egg. They don't like to do an implant with fewer than 3 eggs. Somehow she was able to talk him into it. And after that, she got a phone call. Her best friend's 12-year-old son was killed by lightning. He was on a field trip sitting under a tree and was killed by lightning. And then this just triggered her, her PTSD or whatever. She was terrified to be pregnant. She hadn't yet been told she was pregnant. She'd been implanted. And she was terrified to be pregnant because kids die, and she didn't think she could psychologically do it. But she had to let go of the fear. She had to learn how to let go of the fear. And with a lot of intensive help of the professionals around her and the spiritual leaders around her, she was able to let go of the fear. And 9 months to the day after that child was hit by lightning, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. So that's the end of the book. And I absolutely feel terrible. I glossed over so many really good stories, personal narratives, but as you can see, I read the shorter versions, and they're really long, and nobody wants me to read the book out loud. I recommend this book very, very much. I hope you like this topic. I would like some feedback. I would appreciate feedback if this is a topic that you want me to continue, because I have another book for next week. And I can't reach them right now. They're over there on the shelf. I have the whole collection of Dr. Brian Weiss's books, and I'll show you tomorrow if I remember. And Soul Survivor, The Search for the Girl with Blue Eyes, Embraced by the Light, Dr. Fenwick's book, Past Lives, which we covered already. A lot of good literature out there, for sure. So, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope this was interesting for everybody. I have no doubt I'm going to hear from a few people who relate to this topic personally. I just have a feeling about that, which is really cool. So thank you very much, and we'll meet again tomorrow unless I'm hideously sick. I don't know. If this is anything at all like getting COVID itself, no thank you very much. Oh my God. So, back tomorrow, and in the meantime, slán go fóill and slán seo.